Some bonds are supposed to be simple, predictable, even. Family bonds in particular are thought to follow their own rules, boundaries that are never to be crossed, feelings that remain safely defined. Yet life has a way of testing those boundaries, pushing even the best of us toward choices we once thought unthinkable. My name is Lydia. I'm 62 years old, a woman who thought she knew herself well, who thought she knew what family was and where my place in it stood. For years, I lived a quiet, steady life. A late marriage to Thomas brought me a good husband, though one who spent more time on the road than at home. I filled my days with small joys, my routines, and found comfort in knowing things would always be the same. But that was before. Before I found myself alone with Micah, my husband's son from a previous marriage. Micah was like a shadow in the background of our home. A quiet, reserved man who always kept his distance. We had our polite interactions, nothing out of the ordinary. But then something changed. He changed, or perhaps I did. I'm still not sure. All I know is that an unspoken understanding began to grow between us, one that neither of us acknowledged, until we couldn't avoid it any longer. And in a few fleeting moments, everything that felt certain slipped away, and we crossed a line that has left us both reeling ever since. This is the story of how it happened, how I crossed that line and learned the true cost of breaking boundaries. Life at 62 wasn't something I had pictured so vividly when I was younger. Yet here I was, a woman with her routines and small rituals, finding comfort in the stability I'd built over the years. I'd met Thomas later in life, well past the age when most people marry, but it had been right for us. He was a dependable man, calm and steady. As a logistics manager, he spent much of his time away on business trips, leaving me to tend to the house and my own quiet pursuits. And I enjoyed that simplicity. For years, I worked as a physical therapist, helping clients regain their strength and mobility. It was a fulfilling career, though a demanding one. When Thomas and I married, I retired early, eager to embrace the life we'd imagined together. What I hadn't foreseen, however, was that his job would keep him away as much as it did. The loneliness crept in, subtle at first but steady, like a shadow lengthening with each day he was gone. That's where Micah came in. Micah was Thomas's only child from his first marriage. A reserved man in his mid-30s, he lived a life that didn't cross paths with ours much. He worked as an EMT, often pulling long night shifts. When he moved back into our home a few years ago after a rough breakup, it wasn't the sort of joyful reunion that most families might imagine. He kept to himself, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor. I never minded. Our exchanges were civil, even cordial. But we hadn't forged any deep bond. It had always felt strange, this dynamic with Micah. Here we were, technically family, yet there was an invisible line that neither of us dared to cross. I chalked it up to the age difference and the circumstances under which we'd met. After all, he'd only been a part of my life after his father and I married. He was pleasant enough, and I often wondered if things might have been different if Thomas were around more. But we both seemed comfortable with the arrangement, the unspoken understanding that we would share space but little else. Still, as the years went by, I couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in our relationship. He'd offer to help with tasks around the house, fixing a leaky faucet here or changing a light bulb there. Occasionally, he'd bring me a cup of tea if he saw me reading in the living room. These small gestures surprised me, but I welcomed them, appreciating the rare warmth that cut through the silence between us. One particular night stands out as the beginning of the shift. It was late, and Thomas was, as usual, away on a business trip. I was flipping through a book when I heard the front door creak open, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Micah had returned from his shift, looking more worn than usual. I greeted him with a nod, expecting our usual exchange of pleasantries. But he lingered by the doorway, his expression thoughtful. "Long night?" I asked, noticing the dark circles beneath his eyes. He nodded, sighing as he sank into the armchair across from me. Yeah, tougher than usual. Sometimes it just sticks with you, you know? His tone was different that night, soft, almost vulnerable. For the first time, he seemed willing to open up, to let me glimpse the man behind the stoic exterior. I nodded, sensing that this was something he needed to share, even if he wasn't saying it directly. We sat in silence for a few minutes, and then, without knowing why, I reached over and offered him a gentle pat on the shoulder. I can't imagine what you go through, I said softly. But you're doing something important, Micah. Don't forget that. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine with a depth I hadn't seen before. It was a fleeting moment, yet it lingered, a quiet connection that neither of us acknowledged but both felt. I withdrew my hand, suddenly aware of the closeness between us, and resumed my book, hoping to shake the feeling that had settled over me. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind wandered back to our conversation, replaying the look in his eyes, the heaviness in his voice. I'd never thought much about Micah outside of our polite exchanges, but something had shifted. It was as if an invisible thread had appeared between us, drawing us together in ways I hadn't anticipated. I tried to brush it off as mere empathy, a reaction to the stress he carried. But in the quiet darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was beginning to change, something that neither of us fully understood. The following days drifted by uneventfully, yet I found myself thinking about that night, replaying our conversation, his expression, the heaviness in his gaze. I couldn't quite shake it. For years, our relationship had been a quiet, mutual respect, a mere formality between two people who happened to share a house. But now I felt an unexpected connection growing between us, one that left me both curious and unsettled. Then one evening, about a week after that initial late-night exchange, I was sitting alone in the living room when I heard the familiar sound of the front door opening. Micah entered, looking more exhausted than usual, his shoulders slumped and his expression weary. I offered a small smile as he set his bag down, his eyes meeting mine with a tired nod. He moved toward the kitchen, and on impulse I followed him, pouring us both a glass of water. When he sat down at the small table, I placed one glass in front of him and took the seat across. He looked at me with surprise, though he didn't say anything, and we sat there in silence for a few moments, the quietness between us strangely comfortable. After a while, he began to talk, almost as if he couldn't hold it in anymore. He shared stories about his work, the emotional toll it took, how it felt to carry the weight of people's lives in his hands. His voice was low, pensive, as he spoke about things I had never known he'd been carrying. I listened, captivated by this glimpse into a world he'd kept hidden from everyone, perhaps even from himself. "It's strange, you know," he said finally, his gaze fixed on the table. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just drifting through everything, waiting for something to make sense." The raw honesty in his words caught me off guard. Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand over his, a comforting gesture that felt both natural and deeply unfamiliar. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a flicker of vulnerability that made my heart skip. "I know that feeling," I whispered, squeezing his hand gently. "Life has a way of pulling us in directions we never planned for." He didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he held it, and in that moment, I felt an intensity between us that I hadn't expected. It was as if, for the first time, we were truly seeing each other, two lonely souls finding a small moment of solace in the unlikeliest of places. As we sat there, the room felt smaller, the air thicker, charged with something unspoken. I knew I should pull my hand back, break the silence, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My heart raced, a sense of exhilaration filling me as we lingered in the moment. Finally, he released my hand, his expression shifting back to the polite formality I was more accustomed to. "Thank you, Lydia," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my throat tight, and we both rose from the table, moving in different directions without another word. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about him, my mind drifting to his tired eyes, the way he'd looked at me. It felt wrong, these thoughts, but I couldn't stop them. For the first time, I wondered if he felt the same way. If there was something lingering between us that neither of us wanted to admit. Days passed, and though we didn't mention that evening in the kitchen, the air between us seemed charged with an awareness that hadn't been there before. We avoided lingering in the same rooms, both of us careful to keep our conversations light, polite, and impersonal. But the tension was undeniable. I'd catch his gaze lingering on me longer than usual, or find my own thoughts drifting to the brief, shared moments that now seemed to echo through the house. One afternoon, I was preparing a simple meal in the kitchen when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see Thomas, but it was Micah, his expression unreadable as he stood in the doorway. "Do you need help with anything?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes holding a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. I smiled, though I felt my pulse quicken. "No, I've got it under control, but you're welcome to keep me company." He stepped into the kitchen, and we fell into an easy rhythm, moving around each other as we prepared the meal. The quiet between us was comfortable, yet filled with an unspoken tension that seemed to grow with every passing minute. At one point, as I reached for a dish on the counter, my hand brushed his, and I felt a spark run through me, a sensation that left me both startled and inexplicably drawn to him. We locked eyes, and for a brief moment, the distance between us disappeared. I felt as though he could see right through me, his gaze penetrating in a way that left me feeling exposed, yet somehow safe. My heart raced, and I was acutely aware of the closeness, the warmth of his hand still resting beside mine. "Lydia," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't stop thinking about it." The words left me speechless, my mind racing as I tried to process the weight of his confession. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, I simply looked at him, my heart pounding as the unspoken tension between us grew thicker, more tangible. Finally, I took a step back, creating a small distance between us. "Micah, this is complicated. We're family, and we need to be careful." He nodded, his expression conflicted. "I know, believe me, I know, but it doesn't change how I feel." With that, he turned and left the kitchen, leaving me standing alone, my heart pounding and my thoughts swirling. I knew that whatever was happening between us was dangerous, that it was a line we couldn't afford to cross. But as I watched him walk away, I felt an ache in my chest, a longing I couldn't explain. That night, I lay awake, replaying the encounter in my mind, feeling both exhilarated and deeply conflicted. I knew that I should let go of these feelings, push them aside and pretend they didn't exist. But I also knew that something had changed between us, something that couldn't simply be ignored. I told myself that it was just a phase, a passing moment of confusion. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was already in too deep. Over the next few weeks, Micah and I found ourselves in each other's company more often than I'd expected. It was as if some unspoken agreement had formed between us. A shared understanding that our connection, while unwise, had become something we both valued, something we couldn't walk away from. One weekend, Thomas was away on another business trip, and Micah offered to take me out to a nearby park for some fresh air. The idea seemed innocent enough, but as we walked along the tree-lined paths, I felt the familiar pull between us, the silent current that had been building for weeks. We sat down on a bench, overlooking the lake, the silence between us comfortable yet charged. I watched as he skipped a stone across the water, his expression contemplative, and for a moment I felt the urge to reach out to him, to offer some kind of comfort that I couldn't quite define. "You know, Lydia," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Being around you, it's the only time I feel like I can truly breathe. His words hit me with a strange, bittersweet pang. I felt both flattered and fearful, knowing that what we were sharing was skirting the edges of propriety, threatening to become something we couldn't control. "Micah, we have to be careful," I said softly, though even as I spoke, I felt the words falter. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "I know, but sometimes I wonder if maybe we were meant to meet each other this way, to help each other." In that moment, I felt a surge of emotions that left me breathless, a mixture of gratitude, longing, and guilt. Without thinking, I reached for his hand, holding it tightly in mine. We sat there, our hands intertwined, neither of us speaking, as we shared a moment of quiet understanding. When we returned home, the weight of the unspoken bond between us felt heavier than ever. A secret that lingered in the air, filling every silence and every glance. I knew that we were walking a dangerous path, but I couldn't bring myself to step away. And so, our quiet meetings continued. Each encounter deepening the connection between us, each shared moment pulling us closer to a line I knew we shouldn't cross. But by then, I was already lost, caught up in a bond that felt both forbidden and inevitable. The night that changed everything started innocently enough. Thomas was out of town for a conference, leaving Micah and me alone in the house. I spent most of the day keeping busy, trying to ignore the anticipation that seemed to simmer just beneath the surface. By the time evening came, the house felt emptier than usual, and I found myself in the kitchen, cooking a meal that I knew was more elaborate than necessary. Micah came in as I was setting the table, a look of surprise crossing his face. "This looks amazing," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Is it a special occasion?" I shrugged, trying to keep my tone casual. "Just thought it'd be nice to have a proper meal. It's been a while since we did this." We ate in near silence, the quiet punctuated only by occasional small talk. But even as we exchanged words, the unspoken tension between us seemed to fill the room. I felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement, as if I were walking a tightrope, balanced on the edge of something I couldn't fully understand. After dinner, we lingered in the living room, each of us nursing a cup of tea. I could feel Micah's gaze on me, a weight that was both comforting and unsettling. Finally, he set his cup down, his expression contemplative. "Lydia," he began, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you. Something I've been struggling to put into words." I looked at him, my heart pounding as I waited for him to continue. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that I hadn't seen before, a quiet desperation that mirrored the emotions swirling within me. "I don't know when it started," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "But being around you, it feels different. I can't explain it, but it's like you're the only person who truly understands me. And I know this isn't right, but I can't help how I feel." His words hung in the air, a confession that left me breathless. I felt a surge of emotions, relief, fear, and a longing that I'd been trying so hard to suppress. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat, and I simply looked at him, unable to hide the feelings I'd been burying. In that moment, the distance between us seemed to dissolve. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand finding his. He looked up, his eyes searching mine, and I felt a connection that went beyond words. A bond that had been growing, unacknowledged, for so long. "Micah," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This isn't easy for me either. But I can't deny it." He moved closer, his hand resting gently on mine, his touch warm and steady. We sat like that for a long time, neither of us speaking, as the weight of our shared feelings settled between us. I knew that we were treading dangerous ground, that what we were feeling was a line we couldn't afford to cross. But in that moment, all the reasons, all the fears, faded away, leaving only the quiet, undeniable connection that had drawn us together. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do, Lydia?" I looked down, my heart heavy with the knowledge of the choice before us. "I don't know," I replied softly. "All I know is that this doesn't feel wrong, not in the way it should." For a moment, we simply sat there, the weight of our unspoken decision settling over us. And then, as if by some unspoken agreement, we both stood, our movements slow and tentative. He took my hand, leading me toward the sofa, where we sat, side by side, lost in the quiet intimacy of the moment. That night, we didn't speak much. Our words replaced by glances, touches, and an understanding that went beyond anything I'd ever felt. The closeness between us felt both comforting and exhilarating, a quiet surrender that left us both breathless. By the time dawn broke, we both knew that everything had changed. We had crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone, and yet as I sat there beside him, a quiet peace settled over me. A feeling that, for the first time in years, I was exactly where I was meant to be. In the days that followed, Micah and I became more careful, more aware of the risks we were taking. We knew that what we'd done could never be discovered, that the consequences would be too painful for everyone involved. And yet, the bond between us continued to grow, each encounter deepening the connection that had brought us together. We found subtle ways to spend time alone, carving out moments that felt safe, private, and hidden from the rest of the world. Sometimes it was a quiet walk in the park. Other times it was an impromptu coffee in a small cafe where no one knew us. These meetings were innocent on the surface, but each touch, each glance, carried a weight that we both understood. I began to rationalize our connection, convincing myself that we weren't hurting anyone, that what we shared was separate from the life I had with Thomas. I told myself that Micah and I were simply helping each other through a difficult time, that the comfort we found in each other was harmless. But deep down, I knew that we were walking a dangerous path, one that could only end in heartache. As the weeks turned into months, the secrecy of our affair became both exhilarating and exhausting. Every time I saw Thomas, a pang of guilt stabbed at my heart, a reminder of the betrayal I was hiding. I did my best to maintain the facade, to act as though nothing had changed, but the weight of the secret began to take its toll. At family gatherings, I found myself watching Micah from across the room, our unspoken bond simmering just beneath the surface. A fleeting glance, a brief smile. These small gestures became our language, a way of acknowledging each other without drawing attention. And though I tried to ignore the guilt that lingered, it was always there, a quiet reminder of the line we'd crossed. One evening, as Thomas and I sat together in the living room, he looked at me with a concerned expression. "Lydia, is everything all right? You've seemed distant lately." I forced a smile, hoping to hide the turmoil inside. "I'm fine, just a bit tired," I replied, keeping my tone light. But I could tell he wasn't convinced. There was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a sense that he knew something was amiss, even if he couldn't quite put his finger on it. After that conversation, I became more cautious, aware that the delicate balance we'd created could shatter at any moment. I tried to distance myself from Micah, to put space between us in an attempt to protect what little stability we had left. But every time I saw him, every time he looked at me with that quiet intensity, I felt the pull drawing me back, the unspoken bond that refused to fade. I knew that our secret couldn't last forever, that eventually we'd be forced to confront the reality of our choices. But in those stolen moments, as we shared quiet conversations and tender glances, the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the connection that had become my refuge, my escape. And though I knew it was wrong, that the betrayal would one day catch up with us, I couldn't bring myself to let go. The strain of keeping our affair hidden began to take a toll on both of us. I could feel the weight of guilt pressing down, a constant reminder of the line we'd crossed and the people we were hurting. Each time I looked at Thomas, I felt a pang of remorse, a sense of shame that left me feeling hollow. I knew that what we were doing was a betrayal, a violation of the trust we'd built, yet I couldn't bring myself to end it. Micah, too, seemed to feel the burden of our secret. He became more withdrawn, his once open expressions now guarded and tense. Our conversations grew quieter, our interactions more strained, as though the guilt had seeped into every corner of our relationship. We both knew that we were playing with fire, that the secrecy was becoming unbearable, but neither of us wanted to face the inevitable consequences. At night, I lay awake, my mind racing as I replayed our encounters, the shared moments that now felt both precious and tainted. I knew that our connection was a fragile illusion, a fantasy that couldn't survive the harsh light of day, and yet I found myself clinging to it, unable to let go of the only thing that had made me feel alive in years. Each time Micah and I were alone, I felt the tension between us, a mixture of longing and guilt that left us both on edge. Our once easy conversations became fraught with unspoken words, our glances filled with a weight that neither of us could ignore. We were like two actors in a play, trapped in roles that we couldn't abandon, bound by a connection that had grown too deep to sever. The cracks in our relationship became more evident with each passing day. I noticed Micah's hesitation, the way he avoided my gaze, the small gestures that spoke of his own internal conflict. I could feel him pulling away, the distance growing as he struggled with the guilt that we both carried. The day it all came crashing down was one I dreaded, but knew would eventually come. Thomas, in his own quiet way, had sensed the change in me, the distance that lingered in my expressions and mannerisms. And, as careful as I thought I'd been, the secrets I shared with Micah had started to fray, showing cracks that even I couldn't mend. That evening, Thomas arrived home from work, his expression clouded with something more than his usual exhaustion. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, my back to him, when I felt his presence behind me. There was a tense silence before he finally spoke. "Lydia, we need to talk." The tone of his voice stopped me cold. I turned to face him, my heart pounding, though I forced a calm expression. "Of course, Thomas. Is everything all right?" He hesitated, his gaze piercing. "I've noticed some things, changes in the way you've been acting. It's like you're not really here anymore, like there's something you're not telling me." My throat tightened and I struggled to maintain my composure. "Thomas, I'm just tired. You know how it is. We all get a little worn down sometimes." But his eyes didn't waver, and in that moment, I knew he could see right through me. "It's not just that, Lydia," he said, his voice strained. "I don't want to think, I don't want to believe, but are you hiding something from me?" I felt a wave of panic rise, and for a brief moment, I considered denying everything, insisting that he was imagining things. But the look in his eyes was one of hurt and betrayal, and I knew I couldn't keep lying to him, not after everything we'd shared. "Thomas, there is something," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I never meant for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." His face fell and he took a step back, his expression a mixture of disbelief and devastation. "You and Micah," he said quietly, as though piecing together the words one by one. "I don't know how, but I could feel something between you two. It's like I was just waiting to hear you say it." The words cut deep, and I felt my own eyes fill with tears. "Thomas, please understand. I didn't set out for this to happen. We were just so lonely, so lost. And somehow, we found comfort in each other." But my words felt hollow, even to me, and I could see that they offered no comfort to Thomas. He shook his head, pain etched into every line of his face. "Lydia, we promised each other trust and loyalty, and now you're telling me that you and my son." He couldn't finish the sentence, and for a moment I wished I could disappear, that I could erase the choices I'd made and the damage I'd caused. I wanted to comfort him, to apologize, but I knew that no words would make up for the betrayal he was feeling. Without another word, Thomas turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing alone in the silence. I knew that the rift between us was too deep to mend, that my actions had destroyed the trust we'd built. And the realization left me feeling hollow, as though a part of me had been torn away. In the days that followed, our home felt like a fractured shell, the air thick with the unspoken tension between us. Micah, sensing the shift, avoided me as much as possible, his own guilt weighing heavily on him. Finally, he made the decision to move out, leaving a simple note on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry, Lydia," it read, "for everything." The emptiness left by his departure was staggering, a void that seemed to echo through the house. I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me, the reality of the life I'd dismantled. I'd betrayed the man who'd trusted me, and in doing so, I'd lost the one person who had made me feel alive in ways I hadn't known possible. But I knew that this was the cost of my choices, that the pain I felt was the consequence of crossing a line I should never have approached. It's been over a year since that night, and though the pain has dulled with time, the scars remain, a reminder of the choices I made and the lives I hurt. Thomas and I still share the same house, though the warmth that once defined our relationship has been replaced by a careful civility, an unspoken understanding that things can never go back to the way they were. There are days when I catch him looking at me, a sadness in his eyes that I know I put there. And while we've managed to find a fragile balance, the trust between us is irreparably broken. We speak in polite tones, exchange small gestures of kindness, but the bond that once tied us together is fractured beyond repair. As for Micah, I haven't seen him since he left. I don't know where he is or what he's doing, and though a part of me misses him, I know that he made the right choice by leaving. The connection we shared was a fleeting, reckless fantasy, a bond built on loneliness and need rather than anything sustainable. And though I still feel a pang of longing when I think of him, I know that our relationship was never meant to last. In quiet moments, when the house is silent and Thomas is out, I find myself reflecting on everything that happened, trying to understand why I let myself be drawn into something that was so clearly doomed. I think back to the woman I was before, a woman who valued loyalty, who believed in the sanctity of family. I can barely recognize her now, and the realization brings both regret and a strange sense of acceptance. I know now that the allure of the forbidden is a powerful force, one that can make even the most grounded of us lose our way. I allowed myself to be swept up in a fantasy, to indulge in a connection that felt thrilling and new. And in doing so, I lost sight of the values I once held dear. And though I've come to terms with my actions, the guilt remains, a reminder of the lines I crossed and the people I hurt. If I could go back, I'd do things differently. I'd find a way to confront the loneliness, to address the cracks in my marriage without seeking solace in someone who wasn't mine to turn to. But life doesn't offer second chances, and all I can do now is live with the consequences of my choices. I share this story not for sympathy, but as a warning, a reminder of the cost of giving in to temptation, of letting yourself be pulled down a path that can only lead to heartache. I've learned that some lines should never be crossed, that some desires, no matter how intense, are best left unfulfilled. And as I sit here, reflecting on the life I've built in the aftermath of the affair, I find a strange sense of peace in the acceptance of my mistakes. I've learned to live with the scars, to carry the weight of my choices, and in doing so, I've found a kind of strength that I didn't know I possessed. For anyone listening, let my story be a lesson. Hold on to the people you love, cherish the bonds you've built, and remember that some boundaries are meant to be respected, because once they're broken, the cost is one you may carry for a lifetime. The moment he pressed the button, I felt the unmistakable jolt. And from the way Lucas's eyes widened, I knew he realized exactly what it controlled. It was supposed to be my private indulgence, a way to escape the crushing monotony of my days in this house. Philip was always away on business, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the deafening silence of a too-big home. But now, standing in the living room with Lucas staring at me in stunned realization, my secret was out. "What the hell?" he muttered, looking down at the small remote in his hand before his gaze snapped back to me. I tried to recover, to pretend it wasn't what he thought it was, but my body betrayed me. The heat in my cheeks, the way I couldn't meet his eyes, it all told him the truth I desperately wanted to deny. His voice dropped, quiet and incredulous. "This is yours, isn't it?" "Lucas, don't," I whispered, taking a step back. But he wasn't letting this go. He stepped closer, holding the remote up like evidence in a courtroom. "So what happens if I press it again?" "Lucas." Click. I gasped, my breath hitching as the device in question did exactly what it was designed to do. My knees felt weak and I gripped the edge of the couch for balance. His expression shifted then, the teasing smirk fading into something darker, more intense. And that was the moment everything changed. Philip had always been a man of ambition, a trait I once admired, but now resented. Our marriage began with promises of partnership, of a life shared equally. But somewhere along the way, I became an accessory, a piece of decor in his carefully curated existence. He worked tirelessly, his focus always on the next deal, the next merger, the next flight to somewhere far away. At first I tried to fill the void. I threw myself into renovating our sprawling home, hosting dinners, and volunteering for local charities. But the novelty wore off, and the loneliness set in. A quiet ache that grew louder with every passing year. The arrival of Lucas hadn't helped. Lucas was Philip's son from his first marriage, a boy I had barely known until he came to live with us. At 23, he was everything Philip wasn't: impulsive, passionate, and unapologetically honest. He had a way of filling a room, his presence magnetic in a way that made it impossible to ignore him. He had returned from college a few months earlier, after a fight with his mother about his future. Philip, ever the fixer, offered him a place to stay while he figured things out. I suspected it was more about control than kindness. Philip had never been one to let loose ends dangle, and Lucas's independence was a thread he couldn't ignore. I didn't expect to feel anything for Lucas beyond the polite indifference of a stepmother. But from the moment he arrived, there was a tension between us, unspoken, unacknowledged, but always there. The day everything changed started like any other. Philip had left early for a week-long business trip, leaving the house unusually quiet. I spent the morning tidying up, trying to chase away the restlessness that had been creeping in for weeks. I was in the living room, rearranging the throw pillows on the couch, when Lucas wandered in. He was barefoot, his hair still damp from the shower, and carrying a coffee mug with the words "World's Okayest Son" emblazoned on the side. "Morning," he said, flopping onto the couch. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. He picked up the TV remote, flipping aimlessly through channels. "You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not," I said, though his casual presence had already unsettled me. As he leaned back, his hand brushed something nestled between the couch cushions. Frowning, he reached down and pulled it out. "What's this?" he asked, holding up the small black remote. My stomach dropped. I recognized it instantly, the sleek, discreet controller I thought I had tucked away safely. "Nothing," I said quickly, my voice sharper than I intended. He raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Nothing, huh? Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" "Lucas, give it to me," I said, stepping toward him. He pulled it back, his grin widening. "Relax, I'm just curious. What's it for? Some kind of sound system?" I reached for the remote, but he dodged me, holding it out of reach. "Lucas, I'm serious. Give it back." And that's when he pressed the button. The look on his face shifted instantly as the realization dawned. His smirk faded, replaced by something else entirely: curiosity, amusement, and a flicker of something darker. "This is yours?" he asked, his tone soft but deliberate. I didn't answer, my face burning with shame. "Oh, it is," he said, leaning back against the couch. "Interesting. Lucas, please, just give it to me, and let's forget this ever happened." He tilted his head, studying me like he was seeing me for the first time. I don't think I can forget this. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I reached for the remote again. But he didn't move, his eyes locked on mine. What else are you hiding, Evelyn? He asked, his voice dropping lower. Lucas, stop, I whispered, but my words sounded weak even to me. He leaned forward, holding the remote just out of reach. Why? Are you afraid I'll find out who you really are? Something inside me snapped then, the weight of years spent pretending to be someone I wasn't crashing down all at once. You don't know anything about me, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Then tell me, he said, his tone soft but insistent. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The tension between us was unbearable, the air charged with everything we weren't saying. And then, without thinking, I grabbed the remote from his hand and stormed out of the room. I spent the rest of the day avoiding him, the weight of the encounter pressing down on me like a physical force. But, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memory of his voice, his gaze, the way he had looked at me like he was seeing through every mask I had ever worn. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I heard a soft knock at my door. Evelyn? His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't answer, my heart racing as I listened to him open the door and step inside. We need to talk, he said, his tone softer now. Go back to bed, Lucas, I said, my voice trembling. He didn't move. Not until you tell me the truth. I turned to face him, my breath catching as I saw the intensity in his eyes. What truth? I whispered. His gaze didn't waver. The truth about you. About us. His words lingered in the dark like an open door, daring me to step through. The truth about us. The room felt suffocating, my thoughts colliding with one another as I struggled to find solid ground. There is no us, Lucas, I said, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the curtains. You don't believe that? Not after today. I sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around me like it could shield me from the weight of his gaze. What happened today was a mistake, a misunderstanding. You keep telling yourself that, he said, his tone calm but unrelenting. But we both know it's more than that. I wanted to deny it, to push him away, but the truth was already clawing its way to the surface. The days that followed were a blur of tension and carefully avoided glances. Lucas seemed content to wait, to let me wrestle with my own thoughts while he carried on as though nothing had changed. But it had. Every time we passed each other in the house, the air felt heavier, charged with unspoken words and stolen glances. It was a quiet afternoon when the dam finally broke. Philip was still away, the house silent except for the faint hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. I was folding laundry in the living room when Lucas walked in, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, he said, his voice steady but firm. I didn't look up. There's nothing to talk about. Stop lying to yourself, Evelyn, he said, stepping closer. You're not afraid of this because it's wrong. You're afraid because it feels right. I dropped the shirt in my hands, the words cutting through my defenses like a blade. Don't, I whispered. Don't what? He asked, his tone softer now. Don't tell the truth, or don't remind you of what you already know. I turned to face him, my chest tightening as I met his gaze. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand more than you think, he said, his eyes searching mine. I've watched you, Evelyn. I've seen how lonely you are, how hard you try to hide it. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I looked away, unable to hold his gaze any longer. This isn't about me. It is, he said, stepping closer. And it's about me too. I'm not some kid, Evelyn. I know what I feel, and I think you feel it too. His words hung between us, daring me to deny them, but I couldn't. The first time it happened, it was almost an accident. We were in the library, a room Philip rarely used, but one I had claimed as my sanctuary. I was standing by the window, staring out at the garden, when Lucas walked in. I didn't mean to scare you, he said, his voice low. You didn't, I replied, though my hands trembled as I set down the book I hadn't been reading. He closed the door behind him, his footsteps soft against the carpet as he crossed the room. I've been thinking about you. Lucas, I can't stop, he said, cutting me off. No matter how much I try, I can't get you out of my head. I turned to face him, my heart pounding as he stopped just inches away. This has to stop. He shook his head, his eyes locking on mine. You don't want it to stop, neither do I. His words were a catalyst, breaking through the last of my resistance. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I reached for him, my fingers brushing against his as he closed the distance between us. The days that followed were both exhilarating and terrifying. We were careful, always watching for signs of prying eyes or suspicious glances. The house became a minefield of secrets, each room holding its own risks and rewards. In the kitchen, our hands brushed as we passed each other by the sink. In the hallway, a fleeting touch on my arm sent shivers down my spine. In the library, under the cover of shadows, we whispered confessions that felt more dangerous than any physical act. But the thrill of secrecy came with its own price. Every stolen moment was a reminder of the line we had crossed, the rules we had broken, and the lives we were risking. The first real threat to our secret came in the form of Victor, Lucas's childhood friend. He had stopped by unannounced one evening, his easy charm masking a sharp wit that made me uneasy. "Nice place you've got here," Victor said, his gaze lingering on the family photos lining the mantel. "Lucas always said his dad married well." I forced a polite smile, feeling Lucas stiffen beside me. "We like it," I said simply. Victor smirked, his eyes flickering between the two of us. "You seem close," he said, his tone laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Victor," Lucas said, his voice edged with warning. "Let's not make this awkward." Victor held up his hands in mock surrender, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't done digging. Later that night, Lucas found me in the kitchen, his expression tense. "He knows something," he said, his voice low. "Victor?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "He's not stupid," Lucas replied. "And he's always been jealous of me. If he figures this out—" I didn't need him to finish the sentence. The stakes were already high enough without adding another player to the game. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lucas reached for my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We stick to the plan. No one finds out." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. The balance we'd precariously maintained began to tilt, and it wasn't long before cracks started to appear in our carefully constructed facade. The first complication came from Philip's business associate, Emma, a sharp and ambitious woman with a penchant for prying where she wasn't welcome. Emma had always been a fixture in Philip's professional life, attending his dinners, overseeing his projects, and inserting herself into his personal affairs whenever the opportunity arose. She was charming in a way that disarmed most people, but I had never trusted her. It started innocuously enough. Emma stopped by one afternoon while Philip was away, armed with a bottle of wine and an air of false camaraderie. "I thought you might appreciate some company," she said, handing me the bottle with a too bright smile. I forced a smile, ushering her into the kitchen. "That's kind of you, Emma. I wasn't expecting anyone." She shrugged, her eyes sweeping the room with the precision of someone cataloging every detail. "Philip mentioned you've been spending more time at home lately. I thought I'd check in." Her words were casual, but there was an edge to them that made me uneasy. "Just keeping things in order while he's away," I said, keeping my tone light. Emma's gaze flickered to the open door leading to the hallway. "And Lucas? How's he adjusting?" I froze for half a second. Barely noticeable, but enough to make my heart race. "He's fine. Why do you ask?" Emma tilted her head, a coy smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, no reason. He's just grown up quite a bit since I last saw him, don't you think?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Later that evening, I found Lucas in the study, his expression tense as he stared out the window. "Emma was here," I said quietly, closing the door behind me. He turned to face me, his jaw tightening. "What did she want?" "To make herself comfortable," I replied, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. Lucas stepped closer, his brow furrowing. "She suspects something, doesn't she?" "I don't know," I admitted, sinking into one of the armchairs. "But she's watching us. I can feel it." Lucas knelt in front of me, his hands resting on the arms of the chair. "We'll handle her," he said, his voice low and steady. "Lucas—" "No," he interrupted, his eyes locked on mine. "I won't let her ruin this. I won't let anyone ruin this." The second complication came from Victor. His arrival was as unexpected as it was unwelcome. He showed up late one night, grinning like he owned the place, his usual bravado in full force. "Thought I'd crash here for a bit," he announced, dropping his duffel bag in the foyer. Lucas stiffened beside me, his posture immediately defensive. "You could have called." he said, his tone clipped. Victor smirked, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. Where's the fun in that? He turned to me, his smile widening. You don't mind, do you, Evelyn? Of course not, I said, though my stomach churned at the thought of him staying under our roof. Victor's presence was a constant source of tension. He had a way of inserting himself into every conversation, every interaction, his sharp wit always teetering on the edge of something cruel. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Victor leaned back in his chair, his gaze flickering between Lucas and me. You two have gotten close, he remarked, his tone light but probing. Lucas stiffened, his jaw tightening. We live in the same house, Victor. What do you expect? Victor chuckled, swirling his glass of whiskey. Fair point, but still. You seem to spend an awful lot of time together. I forced a laugh, hoping to diffuse the tension. Lucas has been helping me with some projects around the house. It's been a nice distraction. Victor's smirk didn't waver. I'll bet. The tipping point came one afternoon when Victor and Emma crossed paths at the house. Emma had stopped by unannounced again, her curiosity clearly piqued. Victor, ever the opportunist, wasted no time ingratiating himself with her. Their conversation filled with thinly veiled barbs and veiled glances in my direction. Quite the setup you've got here, Emma remarked, her gaze lingering on the family photos lining the mantel. Victor grinned, leaning against the arm of the couch. Oh, you should see the dynamics. It's fascinating. Emma's smile was sharp, her eyes narrowing slightly. I'll bet it is. That evening, as I paced in the kitchen, Lucas stormed in, his frustration evident. Victor's going to ruin everything, he said, slamming a glass onto the counter. I know, I replied, my voice trembling. He's already sniffing around, and now Emma's in the mix. It's only a matter of time before one of them puts the pieces together. What do we do? I asked, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Lucas leaned against the counter, his head in his hands. We need to get ahead of this, before they do. The tension in the house was unbearable, every moment a careful dance around the truth. But no matter how hard we tried, the walls were closing in. The first crack appeared when Emma cornered me in the hallway, her tone casual but her words cutting. You've been quiet lately, Evelyn, she said, her smile sharp. Anything you'd like to share? I forced a laugh, shaking my head. Not at all, just busy with the house. Emma tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. Funny. That's what Philip said the last time we talked. My breath caught, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. And what exactly did he say? Emma's smile widened. Just that things seem different around here. That night, Lucas and I met in the library, the weight of the day pressing down on us. We're running out of time, he said, his voice low. I know, I whispered, tears pricking at my eyes. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. Lucas stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. We'll figure it out. Together. But even as he said it, I could feel the walls closing in. The inevitable truth waiting to shatter everything we had built. The confrontation was inevitable. With Victor's sharp intuition and Emma's prying eyes, the threads of our secret were unraveling faster than I could hold them together. Every glance, every stray word felt like a trap, a moment that might give away the truth. The tipping point came on a stormy evening. Rain battered the windows and the sound of thunder rolled through the house. Philip had returned unexpectedly, his presence filling the space with a quiet tension. He was in the study with Emma, discussing business, or so I thought, while Lucas and I tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But everything fell apart when Philip called me into the study. I entered hesitantly, my palms damp as I smoothed the fabric of my blouse. Emma was perched on the edge of the desk, her expression carefully neutral, but there was a gleam in her eyes that made my stomach twist. Philip stood by the window, his back to me, one hand clutching a tumbler of scotch. Close the door, he said without turning around. I obeyed, my heart pounding. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Philip turned, his face unreadable. I think you know. Philip, stop, he interrupted, his tone sharp. He gestured to Emma, who slid a folder across the desk toward me. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I flipped it open. Inside were photos, grainy but damning, of Lucas and me. In the garden, in the library. Even in the kitchen, our stolen glances captured like pieces of evidence in a trial. My breath caught and I looked up to find Philip staring at me, his expression a mix of betrayal and fury. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You tell me," Philip said, his voice cold. Lucas burst into the study then, his presence like a thunderclap. "What's going on?" he demanded, his eyes darting between Philip and me. "Perfect timing," Philip said, his sarcasm biting. He held up one of the photos. "Care to explain this?" Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "You've been spying on us?" "Spying?" Philip barked a humorless laugh. "You think I need to spy to know when something's wrong in my own house?" "Philip, this isn't what you think," I began, but he cut me off. "Don't insult me, Evelyn. You've been lying to me for months, both of you." Emma cleared her throat, her voice smooth and calculated. "Maybe we should all take a step back. Emotions are running high." "Stay out of this, Emma," Lucas snapped, his anger flaring. Emma raised her hands in mock surrender, but the smirk on her face made it clear she was enjoying the spectacle. The argument spiraled out of control, accusations flying back and forth. Philip accused Lucas of betrayal, of exploiting my loneliness. Lucas fired back, calling Philip a neglectful husband who only cared about his image. "You were never there for her," Lucas shouted. "You left her alone in this house like a ghost. And you decided you'd be the one to comfort her?" Philip retorted, his voice dripping with contempt. I stood frozen, my heart breaking as the two most important men in my life tore each other apart. The breaking point came when Emma dropped her final bombshell. "You know, Philip," she began, her tone almost casual, "if you're looking for loyalty, maybe you should take a closer look at your own affairs." Philip froze, his glare snapping to her. "What the hell are you talking about?" Emma smiled, her victory complete. "Oh, come on. Did you really think I didn't know? All those late nights? The trips with clients? You've been playing this game a lot longer than Evelyn." The room went silent, the weight of her words settling over us like a suffocating fog. "You're lying," Philip said, his voice low and dangerous. Emma shrugged. "Believe what you want, but maybe you should think twice before throwing stones." Philip stormed out of the room, his fury palpable. Emma followed, her smirk still in place. Lucas and I were left alone in the aftermath, the silence between us heavy with everything unsaid. "This is my fault," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "No," Lucas said, stepping closer. "This is on him, on them, not you." I shook my head, my guilt threatening to consume me. "I've ruined everything." Lucas cupped my face in his hands, his gaze steady. "You haven't ruined anything. We're going to get through this, together." I wanted to believe him, but the storm we had unleashed felt unstoppable. The next day, the photos were leaked. I don't know how they got out, Emma's meddling, Philip's rage, or Victor's jealousy, but by morning, our lives were front-page news. The headlines were brutal, painting us as villains in a scandal that consumed the town. Philip issued a statement, cold and calculated, framing himself as the wronged party. "Betrayal by those closest to you is the deepest cut," he said in one interview, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. Lucas and I were vilified, our names dragged through the mud by tabloids hungry for drama. The walls of the house felt like a prison, the whispers and stares of the outside world closing in. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucas packed a bag. "We can't stay here," he said, his tone resolute. "Where will we go?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Anywhere but here," he replied. "As long as we're together." I looked around the house, the life I had built crumbling before my eyes. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't face it without him. Taking his hand, I stepped into the unknown, leaving behind everything but the promise of what we could be. The drive was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt. Lucas stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, while I gripped the edge of my seat, my fingers aching from how hard I was clenching them. Every mile we put between us and the house felt like a breath of air after drowning, but it wasn't enough to erase the weight of what we'd left behind. The motel Lucas found was small and unassuming, tucked along the edge of a forgotten highway. The fluorescent sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. "We'll stay here for the night," he said as he grabbed our bags from the back seat. I nodded, too drained to argue. Inside the room, I sank onto the bed, my hands trembling. The news had already begun to spread. My phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and messages, each one another thread tying me to the wreckage we'd left behind. I turned it off, dropping it onto the nightstand like it burned my skin. Lucas knelt in front of me, his hands resting gently on my knees. "Hey," he said softly, his voice pulling me back to the present. "We're going to get through this." I met his eyes, searching for the confidence I lacked. "How? Everything's falling apart." "Let it," he said firmly. "Let it all fall apart. We'll start over, just you and me." Tears filled my eyes as I shook my head. "You don't understand. This will follow us forever. People won't forget." "Then we'll make them forget," he said, his grip on me tightening. "Or we'll learn to live with it. But I'm not letting them take you from me." His words were a lifeline, grounding me when I felt like I was spinning out of control. I wanted to believe him, to believe that we could find a way out of this mess together. But the world wasn't so easily escaped. By morning, the scandal had reached its peak. Photos of Lucas and me were plastered across every news outlet, the headlines vicious. "Stepfamily scandal rocks elite circles," one read. Another declared, "From housewife to headline, the affair that shattered a family." Lucas sat beside me, scrolling through his phone, his face unreadable. "They're painting us like monsters," he muttered. "They're not wrong," I whispered, the guilt weighing on me. He turned to me sharply, his voice fierce. "Don't say that. You're not a monster, Evelyn. You're human. And you don't owe anyone an apology for that." The motel phone rang suddenly, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet. Lucas and I exchanged a glance before he picked it up. "Hello?" His expression darkened as he listened. "We're not interested," he said before slamming the phone down. "Who was it?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "Reporters," he said grimly. "They found us." By the time we left the motel, the reporters were already circling. A black sedan was parked near the entrance, its occupants pretending to check a map while their cameras peeked through the cracked windows. Lucas noticed them first and tightened his grip on my hand. "Don't look at them," he whispered, leading me to the car. I nodded, keeping my head down as we slid inside. The engine roared to life, and Lucas wasted no time pulling out of the lot, the sedan following at a distance. "Where do we go now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Somewhere they won't find us," he replied, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. We ended up in a small coastal town hours away, a place where the salty breeze carried with it the promise of anonymity. The motel we found was older but clean, its cracked sign advertising ocean views that were barely visible through the fog. I stood by the window of our room, watching the waves crash against the shore as Lucas paced behind me. The tension between us was palpable, the weight of everything we'd lost pressing down on us. "You regret this, don't you?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. I turned to face him, my chest tightening. "What?" "Coming with me," he said, his tone laced with pain. "Leaving everything behind." I hesitated, the truth too complicated to put into words. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "I don't know what I feel anymore." His expression softened, and he stepped closer, taking my hands in his. "I know it's not easy, but I meant what I said. I'll never let them take you from me. We'll find a way to move forward, together." I wanted to believe him, to believe that the storm we had weathered was behind us. But as I looked into his eyes, I couldn't shake the doubt lingering in the back of my mind. The days turned into weeks, and we settled into a tenuous routine. Lucas found odd jobs to keep us afloat, while I kept a low profile, avoiding the outside world as much as possible. But the whispers of our past were never far away. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face felt like a threat, a reminder that the scandal we had left behind could find us at any moment. One evening, as we sat on the beach watching the sunset, Lucas reached for my hand. "Do you think we'll ever be free of this?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know I don't want to face it alone." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and pink, I let myself believe, for the first time in a long time, that we might find peace. Whatever came next, we would face it together.